Thank you so much, everyone, and welcome back to the Innovations in Policy and Health panel. Up on the screen, we have the listed panelists for today. We have Dr. Mazet, Dr. McNeil, and Dr. Thompson. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Sorry about that, my video is lagging a little bit. So welcome to the Innovations in Policy and Health panel. The goal of this panel is to educate attendees on current advancements in policy and health in relation to One Health practices, while also exploring the important role public policy plays in driving innovation on both a global and a local scale. The three panelists that we have today are Dr. Mazet, Dr. Thompson, and Dr. McNeil, and I'll just give a short introduction and then we'll jump right into the Q&A. So Dr. Mazet is the Vice Provost of Grand Challenges at the University of California, Davis. She's also the Chancellor's Leadership Professor of Epidemiology and Disease Ecology, and founded the One Health Institute at the UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine, where she focused on global health problem solving, especially for emerging infectious disease and conservation challenges. Next, we have Dr. Deborah Thompson, who is the chair of the World Veterinary Association's One Health Education Subgroup, which is a small but mighty committee dedicated to inspiring every vet school on this planet to provide high-quality One Health curriculum. In addition, she serves as an ad hoc member of the World Veterinary Association's One Health Subject Focus Group and is the founder and president of One Health Lessons. And finally, we have Dr. McNeil, who supports ending pandemics, deploying a One Health approach for ensuring timely and community-level outbreak detection. She also has developed and implemented a During Action Review and Tabletop, or DART methodology, to help countries assess current and future needs related to the COVID-19 resiliency and response. So thank you so much for being here today. Let's get started. So firstly, we would like to learn a little bit more about all your backgrounds and what kind of has brought you to where you are today. Specifically, what has inspired your interest in innovation and policy, and why do you still, after all this time, want to be change agents? Dr. Mazet, if you'd like to start us off.
Happy to. Thanks for having me. And I'm just thrilled with this morning's whole panel. It's all the panels and Dr. Laramore's Calvin Schwabe address. So it's great to be here on this special day. I think of all of us as being programmed, obviously, by our DNA, but then shaped, and our perspectives and outlooks shaped by our experiences as we grow up, and that includes professional and educational, right? So I think that I was really shaped early on by growing up here and my formative years being in the 1970s and 80s in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I couldn't help but have a strong social justice and environmental justice ethos. But I also was living through the experience of HIV/AIDS and losing friends and seeing a kind of silent pandemic. And obviously then it was louder than now, but we've gotten very quiet around this pandemic that's still not solved. And I think that really shaped my interest in health, but also, again, made me wonder about these social inequities and taboos and the way that we think about society. So I decided really young, right, in high school to try to go to veterinary school and see what I could do to blend all of these interests in health and environmental and conservation, and felt I would spend my time in conservation and still do try to spend my time in conservation as well as other things. But that really pushed me unknowingly, unwittingly into One Health. And because of all of these interests and this very nicely teed up for us by the previous panel, this desire to be part of solutions rather than problems, or do what we can to contribute to the solutions. So I started working on sea otters after veterinary school and PhD, and that really showed me this connection, right? That we were seeing land use change, human growth at the coastal interface, and then death in sea otters from pathogens that shouldn't be in the sea. And guess what? It came full circle for me then, because people with HIV/AIDS still then were dying of the same things that sea otters were dying of. And so it was vulnerable populations that really made that connection even stronger. And being trained in epidemiology at UC Davis, we are immersed in the human health, animal health, and environmental health and statistics sides of the questions. So I was trained to be a One Health professional and shaped by my experiences to be a One Health professional before we used the term. And I think that just set me up for this lifelong journey that I love. And we can't be successdisciplinar and be part of the solutions if we aren't using a good approach, which I think the One Health approach, because of its transdisciplinary nature and collaborative piece and thoughtful, holistic thinking, allows us to do. But we also need to be thinking beyond ourselves and trying to work on these big problems. So I'm so grateful to UC Davis for that education, as well as this environment and community that really pushes us. And now we need to make sure our political leadership, and that's why the policy piece is just so important, but recognizes the importance here as well.
Thank you so much. Maybe next, Dr. Thompson.
Thank you. John is a hard act to follow, though. Well, thank you very much for the kind invitation to be here. First off, I really appreciate all of the collaborations that I've had so far with the team at UC Davis, even though I'm calling from 3,000 miles away. So the beauty of technology. Thank you again for this opportunity. So the question was, what really shaped, I interpreted it as what really shaped me in my career and how did I get to policy and such, and also veterinary medicine. So just like Carrie and Jana, I'm a veterinarian, and I wanted to become a veterinarian, not when I was younger, like what Jana said, but when I was 21 years old. So a little bit later on in life. For those who know me, they know that I'm a very curious person, for better or for worse. So I like to ask questions. I like to explore a lot of options. And when I happened upon veterinary medicine, I realized that a veterinarian had the power of not only helping the organism, the living thing, the patient, the animal in front of you, but also the people who are reliant on that animal, be it for food, be it for companionship, for milk, whatever it is. And so what's interesting is when I applied to veterinary school, I remember writing in my admissions letter that I want to help people and animals at the same time with my one action. I didn't know what One Health was at that point. So in veterinary school, I learned what One Health was. And I thought two things. Number one, my life finally made sense. Number two, why didn't I know about this 20 years before, right? And so this is what Dean Larimore was saying earlier, you know, teaching children is really, really important. And we don't have to necessarily talk about that today, but I just wanted to throw that in. It's a passion of mine and I think it's indispensable in the One Health space going forward. But going back to policy, and I noticed that Jay Kerr was on the line earlier. Jay Kerr and I worked together in the California Veterinary Medical Reserve Corps. And we were deployed in 2018 to help out with the Paradise Fire, the Camp Fire. And at that point, I realized that not only with clinical medicine could I help contribute to my patients and the families of these patients, but I also realized that I could play a role in the community. And then from that point on, I thought, okay, well, I might as well just try and apply for this fellowship program that takes place in Washington, D.C. It's called the American Veterinary Medical Associations. It's a very long word name. It's Congressional Science and Engineering Policy Fellowship. And I was fortunate enough to have been accepted in that position. And that's what brought me from California to Washington, D.C. Long story short, I worked in the office of Senator Dianne Feinstein. I learned so much in that year. I even wrote a book about it. So happy to discuss that later on. And let's move on to Carrie. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. McNeil.
Sure, absolutely. And both tough acts to follow, but I'm excited. And John, I appreciated how you started young. So I'm going to actually back up earlier than I thought I would answer this question. Because in high school, I also worked with HIV/AIDS patients and watching them all die back in the drug trials when AZT and DDI didn't work. And they were all children. And I was always going to go in different fields. And it did certainly push me towards science and understanding the impact and the importance, and has stayed with me, especially as we look towards, I've ended up working more in infectious diseases than planned. It's been something that's always stayed with me in the challenges that HIV did present and still presents, right? Though, like you said, it's silent. And the other moment growing up in high school that was really seminal for me was I was an exchange student in Ecuador, and I got to spend time in the Galapagos. And I've always been passionate about conservation my whole life. Every picture of me, I think, is outside in nature doing something. And I'll never forget a moment where the guide showed us behind us how all the footprints in the sand had kind of made the sand just totally, messed up and everything else. And he made a comment about how, for now, the nature, like the waves will come back and they'll restore the sand to this beautiful, sandy beach, not disturbed by people. But it's the question of how long can nature keep taking care of herself? And at what point do we need to start intervening on the conservation edge? And it's just a moment that stuck with me for 30 years. So with that, I ended up going to UC San Diego and studying biology. And like Deb, I wasn't sure at first I wanted to be a veterinarian, but it actually was I ended up going into public policy initially, and through the Jesse Unruh Fellowship at the State Assembly and working on natural resources policy and conservation for California. And when I decided to go ahead and apply to vet school, I went to Davis much because of the work that John Amazette and Walter Boyce were doing in ecosystem health. That's what drew me to Davis. So I was like, oh, kind of like Deb said, here's everything that makes sense. People looking at how science can play a role in conservation in the whole system and really that human dimension. During vet school, I was really lucky. I got one of those Geraldine Dodge Foundation grants, and I got to look at that interface of bighorn sheep and trail use in the Palm Springs area for this population of endangered peninsular desert bighorn sheep that are still endangered. And it's really those issues related to that human dimension of wildlife conservation, the ecosystem health, and the policies that really, but whether it's the policies of the locals or the policies of the Endangered Species Recovery Act and how that made that difference. And so that was really, that helped me understand even further what I was already learning working at the State Senate and State Assembly about how community and science and environment all come together. We're all part of the same system, right? And then since then, I did practice for a while, and I loved practicing, but I missed kind of the big picture. And the way I stayed involved was working with the National Vet Response Team as a vet med officer. And during Haiti earthquake, they needed public health vets. And I was like, well, I took all the epi class at Davis. I love public health. And they're like, no, you need a public health degree. So it actually encouraged me to go back, and I went to Emory to Rollins School of Public Health and got my public health master's. And worked a lot in disaster response and there at CDC and maintained the work I was doing with the National Vet Response Team during those years. And then became a CDC Epidemic Intelligence Service officer, where I really got to explore at a state level outbreaks from an environmental health standpoint. So that was wonderful. And then went to Sandia and took kind of that work looking at One Health in outbreak response from an international level, bringing together the preparedness response activities and the outbreak work. And now I'm loving working at Ending Pandemics as their One Health specialist. It's a group that really works at catalyzing community-based approaches to solving early detection. So that's my story, and policies maintained a very important thread throughout the whole time.
Thank you so much for all your answers. I think Dr. Mazet is having some technical difficulties, so we're trying to get her back on. Oh no, she lost her internet, so we'll do our best to get her back on. But maybe we can go ahead and move on to the next question, and then once she's back on, we'll get her responses as well. Is that all right? Perfect. Okay. So the next question is, how would you define policy, and how does the definition of policy and the implementation of that policy change in relation to different communities? And we'll go ahead and we'll start with Dr. McNeil.
Yeah. Okay. So, a lot of times policies, we think about like laws and regulations, right? And that's a lot of the work Deb did in DC and I've done here in California. But policy is so much broader than that. It's really a set of principles, an approach, and a framework that sets that basis for decision making and funding and action. Sometimes it's really explicit, like those laws and regulations, and sometimes it's implicit in organizations. And so I think we've had some great examples today when Dr. Larimore was sharing about the UC Davis policies related to really supporting a One Health and multi-sector approach, right? That fits right in there. That's policy. When Dr. Lamb was sharing the work he did with First Nations in Canada and on caribou conservation, he discussed policies at a larger scale level in terms of land use, and also the policies locally in terms of the animal use. And so that's another example of both of those. On a global level, we've seen One Health policies really driven by different topics of concern. That's at least my perspective. We had the devastating H5N1 in the 2003-2008 timeframe in Asia, and it really showed us this recognized need. And so the OIE, the Animal World Health, the World Health Association, WHO, and the FAO developed a tripartite in 2010, and that was really this international One Health policy for a huge level, saying that, look, we have shared responsibilities for these health risks. And they focused a lot on things like flu and rabies and antimicrobial resistance, which have that zoonotic focus. And so we've seen kind of One Health policies shift depending on the focus. Here we are 10 years later, COVID-19 and climate change have really helped bring back to the table the importance of biodiversity, environmental health. I love y'all mentioned plant health, conservation, that they've got to have a seat at the table. And so we now see UNEP, the environmental protection part of UN, as part of the One Health high-level expert panel. So I just would share that in terms of policy overall, we can think about how this pandemic is providing this awesome opportunity. It has brought us to the forefront of enormous issues in social and health inequities, of colonialism and global health, environmental justice issues, horrible biodiversity losses, and climate change. But in doing so, it's really created this awesome opportunity where we can start to create policies at a local, state, provincial, federal, national, global level in One Health to solve these problems.
Thank you so much. Dr. Thompson?
Thank you. Excellent question. Certainly, when you talk about policy, it reminds me of in medicine when we talk about a lesion. What is a lesion? How do you describe a lesion? Lesion just means abnormality. Done. A lesion on the skin. It's something, a skin. It's something odd with the skin, and then you explain, oh, it's erythema or whatever. But policy, what is policy? It sounds so vague. It sounds so overarching of everything. But what policy is, if you want to whittle it down to the very basics, is it's a way to change behavior of a group of people in order to benefit society. So make the group of people healthier, make them safer, make the environment around them safer. So that is how I see policy, and that's how I explain policy to people who are outside of that bubble, let's say. So there's a lot of power there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So the next question that we have are, what are some policy success stories and others that you have seen both domestically and abroad that have made the biggest impact on you? And we can go ahead and start with Dr. Thompson.
Some of the biggest policies, I'll share a story from what your question is. It seems like it could be a personal story. So I'll share a story of a time on the Hill. So I was on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. between October of 2019 and October of 2020. Thinking back to that time, we had, at the onset of a pandemic, of course, we had two different impeachments. We had civil unrest. We had, foreign relation issues. We had a lot going on in this country and certainly the world. And what we call on the Hill, your area of focus is your portfolio. And I had been fortunate to have found an office that supported me in having a One Health portfolio. Now, they didn't know what One Health was. Certainly, they all know what it is now. But I started in early October of 2019. By the next month, I brought to my boss, Senator Feinstein, an idea where we could create an announcement, a public announcement of this is how, it's called a resolution declaring this is the feeling of the Senate. This is what the Senate, the United States Senate feels about something. And we wanted to give a special shout out to One Health efforts around the country. And long story short, she said it's a good idea, but you need to find somebody from the other political party. It has to be bipartisan. So it was my responsibility to do a lot of research for the other senators, meet with a lot of staff members of those senators, have heart-to-heart conversations of what are the wants and needs of those other senators, and also bring a story of One Health that would be not only memorable, but palatable to the staff members of these other offices. Fortunately, I was successful in that mission, and on December 19th of 2019, the Senate Resolution 462 declared January of 2020 to be National One Health Awareness Month. And while there were some people on the Hill, on Capitol Hill, who were not necessarily they were not ready to sign on to that particular piece of legislation, within 2 months of that, they called me up or they wrote me emails and said, Deb, we get it now. We understand. How can we move this forward? And that started the whole One Health movement that's happening on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., which is very exciting. Okay, I'll give the floor to somebody else. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And so glad to have you back, Dr. Mazet. So the question that we're on right now are just what are some policy success stories and others that you have seen both domestically and abroad that have made the biggest impact on you?
Yeah, I'd like to use one fairly recently, and I apologize for the internet disruption. I'm now on a hotspot, so hopefully it stays, but it's a little unstable. I wanted to just make sure we're realizing that policies are made everywhere. So we make policies in our home, how we deal with, who does the laundry or whatever, that's making a policy at home, right? And in communities, and then of course at district and state and national and international levels. And we heard about COP26 earlier. I think the international sort of policies are more voluntary, right? And states or nations sign on and off. And so I feel like those are really powerful when they are used almost as peer pressure to get groups to do the right thing. And that's what a lot of our climate sort of international compacts and treaties are around, or more the peer pressure. For me, a success story that I'd like to share was in West Africa, and that was around Ebola. So during at the end stages of the terrible West African Ebola outbreak, the communities just couldn't even say the word Ebola anymore. They were devastated, and they were used to people in white suits coming in, and that meant death and mistrust and all sorts of things. And our Predict team was asked to come in and actually look in those same communities where Ebola took hold and find the origins, right? The evolutionary source of that Ebola. And it's another story, but in that region, we did find Ebola and a likely evolutionary bat source for Ebola. But we wanted to work with the communities, and they were like, yeah, people come and take samples and take our family members away, and we never see them again. We don't want to talk to you, and we don't want to talk about Ebola. And so we instead of top down, like national legislation or government telling them you have to work on this, we sat down, our teams sat down and engaged with them and said, okay, you're not ready to say that word, but what if we're looking for other things here as well at the same time? How can we do that? And we found things like coronaviruses, but we also found a brand new Ebola that we didn't know whether or not it would infect people at the time. It does, but we also still don't know whether it causes disease. So working with them and talking about the hosts and showing them how the distribution of those hosts across all of Africa actually were spread, and how they could take their own risky behavior into their hands and change it at home. And to do that, we actually developed something called the Living Safely with Bats book, which has now been translated into numerous languages, dozens, and delivered in even more, because it's delivered as more of a visual picture book style with a narration on the back that, as the narrator is giving it, can switch into any local language. The impact of working with the communities, not just taking from the communities and making national policy, but working with them and coming back and saying, you can, in your household, in your community, make a policy to maybe not hunt and eat bats, or maybe just not touch them and get them out of your homes, and giving them all of those options for their own personal policies to reduce their own risk, made a huge change. And the communities told us that they could say the word Ebola again, because they felt like they were on the cutting edge of how to control it and keep from getting it again, instead of just being told something terrible is looming in your neighborhood, good luck. So for me, that was, it continues to inspire me to remember that all of these things begin and end in communities.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Dr. McNeil?
Yeah, I'm going to just follow on that and say we've talked about defining policy, and really that, just like you talked about, John, it's at every level, and the community level to me has always been the most powerful in working with and in communities. I think I will go ahead and show the video to show some of the participatory surveillance programs that we're working on. I've been doing a surveillance, an assessment of all these participatory surveillance programs around the world, and it's been super inspiring because you're seeing it happen in every aspect of One Health. And the wildlife and environmental health communities in particular, I think, are really exciting because, unlike a companion animal or livestock animal who has a vet, or a person who has a doctor or community health worker, they don't have the eyes and ears as much, right, about what's going on. And so we've been developing some One Health systems in a number of countries that kind of bring together the experts and the locals, that it's really the local people identifying outbreaks early. And ending pandemics has helped support some of these programs, but a lot of them are supported organically all over the world. And so I'll just show you a quick video of kind of what this means, and because I'm excited about it, and I think it's an incredible. Hold on one second. I got to remember to push hopefully the audio will work this time. So anyway, so just let me know, make sure we can hear it.
Outbreaks happen.
Is that working?
Every day around the world.
Yes, it is.
The challenge is preventing any one of them from becoming the next pandemic. Speed matters to stop a spark from becoming a raging fire. We need eyes and ears everywhere to quickly identify and report unusual events in humans, animals, and the environment. This approach is called participatory surveillance. Communities are actively stepping up to become part of the solution. In Cambodia, people are reporting health events in real time through a free national hotline. In Thailand and Tanzania, local health workers are finding outbreaks in animals before any spread to humans. And in Brazil, this approach was used for the first time during mass gatherings. Everyone has a role to play in stopping a threat anywhere from becoming a threat everywhere.
Okay, I know I'll stop it there, but this idea, and some examples you guys showed earlier of UC Davis's new wildlife health surveillance program, working through all the rehab centers. There's just a number of these types of programs. And what we've seen is that Thailand program, for example, they discovered a foot and mouth disease outbreak very early, and it's ended up saving millions of dollars for the small community in terms of their agriculture and their livelihood. That hotline in Cambodia has been used for animal and human health, and now has ended up being the #1 way they're tracking and identifying COVID-19 cases, right? So by developing policies at a local level that bring together the One Animal Health, environmental health, and public health experts, you really can help make a huge difference at a, you know, it all builds up.
Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing the video as well. It worked out great. The next question that we have for everyone is, what level of policy does the layperson focus on working with to instigate change? And we can go ahead and start with Dr. Mazzett.
So I think, you know, individuals are so much more powerful than we actually often recognize. So I think Deb will tell us, and Carrie will tell us, with their intense policy experiences, that you have a lot of power even at that national level and the international level. There are, all the time, there are consultations, public comment periods. Those are important. And you actually have a huge voice, and writing to your senator and congressperson are very powerful ways. They pay attention, especially if that starts to happen in volume, and you can really, you know, make a whole grassroots change by organizing those things. But in addition to that, we have the ability, again, we talked about in our households, in our communities, to set policy, and you can do that locally with your friends, family, and village and community members. So I think a lot of us think of policy as something we don't have the chance to change, and I've learned that we have a voice at every single level. And right now, in my new position for UC Davis, trying to work on solutions or contributing more impactfully to the solutions for these big, wicked problems of planetary health, and using the One Health approach for contributing to these solutions. I really want people to understand that they have a voice and they can change. And one of my current desires is to really work with folks to bring together the communities that sometimes feel like they're competing. But I think of all these things that are happening to us, this pandemic, climate problems, the crisis, the food insecurity, social injustice. Those are all pandemics that are simultaneously happening, and they all have one cause, and that cause is our human behavior, and we have the ability to change that. And I think if all those different advocacy groups and very powerful voices in our communities would work together instead of sometimes against each other, to actually look at that root cause and say holistically, using the One Health approach, that we can make a change if we band together. Yes, we're going to go back into our own institutions and organizations and work on whatever we're trained to do. But if we band together to recognize and say, but now let's also collaborate and make sure we're working for the holistic greater good, we might get at some of these solutions because we're the cause.
Thank you so much. Those are very important points. Thank you. Dr. McNeil?
Yeah, sure. I'll just give example kind of at that state level. When I was working at the legislature, some of the bills we worked on were really brought by citizens, right? One of the first big pieces of legislation I worked on nuclear waste transportation safety was because people were worried about trains with nuclear waste going through their backyards and their police and firefighters not being appropriately, you know, protected for that. And so you can, as John mentioned, you can go to your legislatures and find these. You can build coalitions and you can work within your fields. I think COVID-19 and climate change have emphasized more than ever the choices we make in our everyday lives and how we can have an impact, right? And so whether or not we wear a mask, or whether or not we unplug our appliances, or, you know, drive gas guzzling cars, I mean, there's so many individual choices we make every day. And I think as we look at the fact that politics are so divisive, and we're going to have changes in administrations, we're going to have changes in government that are going to make it more and less difficult, more, you know, easier and harder for large scale policies to have impacts. It's critical we do that. But I think that makes it even more important that at a community and a local and family and home and level that we're making those decisions and making those policies within our own lives that make a difference. And the last example I'll give is just when I was a Delta keeper out in the Central Valley on water quality issues, you know, it was community volunteers that went out and helped do water sample testing and who would identify potential pollution issues and brought it to our attention, that we were able to go to regulators and get those problems fixed. And so again, whether it's on a voluntary scale within your home, within your community, or again, if you want to, there's plenty of opportunities, and it's critical to get involved at that national and state level or local government level as well. So.
Thank you so much. Dr. Thompson?
Excellent question. I would say there was a lot that was covered that was fantastic. I was surprised when I was on the Hill with how much a single person from a constituent can have for power, for influence in an office. I was so surprised. And I also noticed the people who were calling into the office, they're often the retiree age. Where were the 20-year-olds? Where were the 18-year-olds, right? Where were they? I kept thinking, it's something that is not available everywhere in the world, is that we have the right to vote. Get out and vote. Every single, even if you think it's the smallest election ever, just get out and vote. You can also not only, you know, come to Washington, D.C. and speak with the your senators here and your representatives here, but they have a lot of offices throughout California. And I have to say, the office that I worked in, Senator Feinstein's office, was a well-oiled machine. We kept track of every single phone call that came in. We kept track of the letters, the visits. And so if, say, 100 people called in about one particular subject, the senator knew about that. Knowledge is power, right? Sharing your information, sharing your passion can have a real influence. And since I was a science and engineering policy fellow, I took a lot of the science meetings with physicians, with veterinarians, with researchers. And oftentimes, my colleagues in the office turn to me after the visitor leaves and they say, Deb, can you translate that for us? What on earth were they just talking about? So then I had, to translate it all to make it palatable, right? To make it actionable. And that's another reason why I wrote this book, because people need to know how to communicate with policymakers and policymakers' staff. It is so important to know their staff. It's a short read. We could talk about it another time, but I did that on purpose. So long story short, vote as much as you can. If you are publishing anything, be sure to mention policymakers by name. The reason behind that is because there are such things as Google alerts, and every single elected official has a PR team that figures out when and where their boss's name is mentioned. So if you are talking about One Health and you say, oh, the very first piece of One Health legislation that was passed in the United States Congress was with Senator Dianne Feinstein, and you say her name, then the office will get pinged. So word to the wise, tag everybody and vote as much as possible.
Good advice. Thank you. The next question that we have for everyone are, what are the barriers to innovations in your fields, and what resources or discussions do you think need to take place in order for policy, specifically in relation to One Health, to be successful? So we'll go ahead and start with Dr. McNeil.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I just think anytime you bring together different disciplines, you're always going to have a challenge. You're going to have the language problem that Deb just mentioned. You're going to oftentimes have the problem Jonna mentioned, where people think there's competing interests, right? And so I try to think about, there's kind of a couple rules of thumb, right? So first is really making sure everybody understands the other person's role. And in One Health, what I've seen, especially globally, but also domestically, is nobody, like, what does an environmental health person do? What actually happens in veterinary medicine? A lot of human health professionals don't really understand that we always kind of have that herd health approach to our cases, right? We're always looking at husbandry and such. And we don't always understand how the human health system works. It works totally differently with insurance systems and all these other pieces. In some cultures, there's a difference in terms of MDs have a higher level training than a veterinarian in terms of the number of years. And so sometimes it's hard to have an equal playing field and equal level conversation. And so making sure everybody understands and respects each other's roles in solving the problem you're solving. And then the second is that language issue, right? And it can either be making sure that everything's translated into a science that everybody can understand, or even if you're doing it like we're developing surveillance systems, have case definitions that are the same, right? Making sure those pieces, everybody understands what those are, and make sure they have really clear objectives. And then the last is just making sure whatever you're putting together policy-wise in developing collaborations isn't more work, but maybe less work or the same amount of work for people, because everybody's busy, and health professions, environmental conservation organizations are always underfunded, understaffed, everything else, right? So if we can find ways to make these solutions that are more successful, more efficient, I think it's really helpful. And the quick example I'll give is that during those these DART programs we've done during COVID for a couple countries, where we're helping bring together all the sectors, looking backwards, how has the response gone so far and talking about it, but then developing these future scenarios and what ifs of what's going to happen. And in doing that, the epidemiologist from animal health is getting to hear from public health about what they're going to do, you know, in a case where, you know, the animals, you start getting companion animal transmission back to people. You can work through all these scenarios where everybody has different roles, and you can learn and understand. And what we've found out of that is, first of all, some opportunities for synergy. You know, I mean, animal health and plant health in different countries have played a really important role in their laboratories providing surge capacity. Animal health and plant health are oftentimes the people out in the community that the community trusts. And so during these DARTs, we found that, this is the animal health sector be a great partner for risk communication to rural communities who aren't complying, right? And so I think that you can use activities like this, working through stories, scenarios together, or you can just do the type of policy discussions Deb's had on the Hill, where you bring coalitions together, and the type of work John is doing with these grand challenges. It sounds like they're all opportunities. But so again, like my kind of rules of thumb is make sure common objectives, shared language, shared respect of each other's roles, and then just making sure that you're doing it in a way that people can see it's a common benefit and a common goal, and hopefully not a lot more work and time.
Thank you so much. Dr. Mazet.
I completely agree with Dr. McNeil there. Just adding on, I think, and this fitting with our One Health Day and One Health Symposium, is that the silos that our systems have evolved into can really get in the way. And in a university setting like us, we're not perfect either. We have bureaucratic machines and systems that were set up 100 years ago and evolved to do certain things, and we need to look at them now because they may not be fit for purpose anymore. I will just bring in one topic we haven't talked a huge amount about in this session, in sort of food systems and food security. For example, we developed our food systems in a way that they just evolved so that we could get cheaper food to more people, and we're just extracting, like mining the earth to do that, and we're not restoring the earth unless we're really living in a traditional practice where we eat what we grow and we know we need it to grow again next year. So we've moved away from that traditional practice, and we've gone into systems that or just make more food cheaper and get it to the masses. And what's happening, we're seeing the social changes in that, so that the cheapest food is the least healthy food. It's the most fattening food. So you have people who only have access to frozen and packaged food and are getting dual diseases of both obesity and diabetes while they're undernourished. And then we have people on the other end of the financial spectrum that are getting, amazing cheeses or delicacies from all over the world. It's just broken. And the bottom line is the planet can't sustain it. So it's another one of those grand challenges that show us very specifically where we have broken everything apart and given people different instructions as far as how to be successful, and that they just don't ever meet up. So I think those obstacles really need to be broken down. Those silos need to be broken down, and we need to think more holistically about how, unfortunately, all our systems are organized. And you had great examples in the previous panel that show that as well.
Thank you so much. Dr. Thompson?
Honestly, you hit on something that I could speak on for 2 hours, but I'm going to try to whittle it down to 2 minutes. There were so many things that were flying through my head after hearing Dr. McNeil and Dr. Mazet speak. So many things. Okay, I guess the 2 biggest points I wanted to share as an answer to this question is, number 1, when it comes to the experience that I've had on the Hill, when it comes to One Health, people are a lot more interested in knowing about it, interested in supporting it these days. And I'm happy to say that the very last appropriation cycle, appropriations for those people who are not, familiar with the jargon, is think about money, how to disperse money. Okay, that's just the fancy way to say it. So there was in the appropriations language, there was specific language that was focused on furthering the education of farmers for agroforestry and silvopastures. So planting trees in areas where there are open pastures for animals. That's going to provide several benefits, and they would be including, but definitely not, it's not an all exhaustive list, but shade for the animals, creating less stress. So more meat and milk production, better water retention in that area. And Lord knows water is a big issue in California. We could talk about erosion, and the list goes on and on. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that where I personally see One Health advocates around the world, I have been very fortunate, just like Dr. McNeil and Dr. Mazet have in their career worked with people from a lot of different disciplines. And the way I see One Health, and you can interpret it any which way you want, but the way I see it is that we are the bridge between the silos. We need to know how to communicate between these silos, right? So when it comes to a favored characteristic of One Health advocates and One Health experts, we need to, as Carrie had said, translate everything, but also do it in a way that builds relationships and builds trust amongst all the different stakeholders. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much. Those are all very important things to think about. So I have a couple more questions. We do actually have a question from one of the attendees. So they're asking, from your experiences, what are the competencies of the One Health leaders that exist today?
Of the competencies of specific people, or the competencies we want to have in One Health leaders?
Maybe let's say having One Health leaders. That's
Okay. That's safer, right? Let's see. We'll all go to the participants. You have this and you have that. No, it's a great question. And we do have a paper out on One Health competencies that we put out a couple of years ago. If you want to check it out, the first author is Eri Tagami, and it's published in the National Academy of Medicine's Perspective. So that's one to check out if you want to look at sort of underrepresented competencies, overrepresented competencies, and those ones in the middle. And think about, I think what's important is, if you're moving into this field, think about your personal competencies and what you want to add to that to be able to contribute to a group. Critical to that is having a disciplinary background that's strong in something, so you bring that skill set to the group. So I do highly encourage you to come to the table with something to add, right? And if you're deciding what that is at this point in your life, you may want to look at the underrepresented competencies and get trained in that if you're still in the mode of getting trained, so that you bring more to the gaps. If you're already trained deeply in a discipline, that's great. Work on your soft skills. And by that, I mean, look inwardly and introspectively and think about how to communicate with respect, even if you don't understand each other's disciplinary language. So sometimes words in one discipline mean something different than words in another discipline. And so we just have to turn up our listening skills, temper down our sort of argumentative side, which comes along with the critical thinking training that comes along with scientists, and try to support each other and be respectful while hearing people out, but still bringing your disciplinary background and your own personal experiences, as we talked about at the beginning of this panel, to bear, so that we can find and work towards better solutions that are more holistic.
Thank you so much. Would anyone like to add anything to that?
I would just add, I think what the humility you're getting at, John, I think is so important, and really not only learning from your colleagues, but learning from the communities you're working in and recognizing they bring tremendous knowledge and skills, and always being open to learning and to having excellent mentors. Obviously John is a mentor to me. We have having great mentors is key, I think, any field as you move forward, and just being creative and open and not thinking in the silos where we are trained to work. And I think trying to get opportunities like that RX One Health course and other, there's all looking at the competence she shared in that paper, there's a lot you can do to do the training and the skills, and really grasping any opportunity you can. And I would say not just thinking about bringing together, public health, animal health, environmental health, plant health, but think beyond that. What are the other sectors that are involved, right? Is it the business communities, the private sector? Is it transportation? Is it logistics? Like, there's so many different areas that all really intersect, and we've seen that in this crisis. So thinking, who else can you bring to the table who somebody wouldn't expect to be there, who might have something to share?
These are great answers. I would say One Health is really beautiful because it's so malleable. You can form it in a way that meets the need of any audience. And as long as the very first step of your communication with another person or another group of people is to actively listen and understand where they're coming from. And, it plays a role in humility, right? But, put yourself in their shoes, understand their backgrounds, what are their needs? And then once you understand their needs and who they are through and through, then you can identify, oh, well, they will benefit from either the One Health approach by doing this or that or the other. Now, we all have our own strengths. We also have our own, let's say, instead of weaknesses, areas for improvement. But the beautiful thing with One Health is that we come together and we leverage each other's skills, and it's all about synergy of strengths. So yet another reason why One Health should be everywhere.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So we did, based on this topic, we did get another question that was asking, could you please share what some of the underrepresented competencies are for folks who are still in training of One Health work?
And I just put that paper in the chat. I'm not sure. I don't think I can add it to the Q&A. So I'm not sure if everyone in the chat means all participants or if it's just the folks on the backside. So I apologize if that doesn't work, but maybe the team can distribute it if not. I'll also just here, I'll make a little quick, I'll try to share something with you. Nope, I can't. Oh, maybe I can. It's just going to stop somebody's sound. I think probably Carrie's sound there. So let me.
I'll be quiet. It's fine.
No, no. I think from your video before. So let's see. There we go. There we go. Can you guys see that? So here are the what we mapped as well represented epidemiology and environmental health, ecology, most underrepresented, plant biology, antimicrobial resistance, and law. And then I was pretty surprised because people talk about zoonoses being, overrepresented, and it is what we talk about the most, but it's not what we train people in the most, which is pretty interesting, especially given what we're going through right now. So that's kind of interesting, but I'm sure you can see here that there's much to do, and I really am pleased to see that the social and behavioral sciences are really well represented. Now, this is represented actually not in what people do in their daily lives, but in training programs that have been developed for One Health. So while social and behavioral sciences are looking like they're coming up in the training programs, that's good news, because I want as many people to start to be trained in that as possible, especially in communication and behavior change, because again, I think we really identified a big weakness during this pandemic, is that we don't communicate or inspire trust in scientific findings as much as we should.
May I just add, as Aradna had said, I'm the chair of the World Veterinary Association's One Health Education subgroup, and we together have done a literature review of not just Ari Tagami's paper, which is amazing, and Helena Amaguni's paper, which is also amazing, but a lot of others. And we've also looked at universities around the world in their One Health programs, and it's not just veterinary schools, and it's not just masters in One Health or PhDs in One Health, which do exist if you're not aware of that. But some of the areas that we have identified that are of great importance, but are not seen everywhere, but I feel like they should be, is economics, as what Jonna had just showed. Economics is so important because if you are going to be talking with policy and advocacy, you have to know how to speak economics. Why? Because that's what the policymakers care about. Like it or not, that's their language. So you need to know how to speak economics with them. One Health governance is also one. A few different universities around the world focus on water and the importance of water. Others have entrepreneurial thinking in One Health as a core course. So while I truly respect and love the program at UC Davis, there are a lot of different flavors of One Health around the world. So moving forward, I think there is nothing that's going to stay the same, right? The only constant in the world is change. So we all have to be comfortable with change. It's just, how are we going to roll with that change? How are we going to make adjustments, right? We have to have forward thinking. And the leaders in business today no longer say that communication is a soft skill. They say it's a hard skill. So some food for thought.
Thank you so much. Okay, so the final question I have, just like the first panel, is are there any book recommendations that you all have that you guys think we should be reading right now? And anybody who wants to start it off can go ahead.
I can recommend Deb's book. Can you tell us a little more about it?
That was not a setup, I promise you all. Okay. But I do have it on my desk. So here you go. The Art of Science Communication. Yes, Dr. McNeil, I know, is laughable, but I have it out near me always.
It's awesome.
The Art of Science Communication, sharing knowledge with students, the public, and policymakers. Because ultimately, if you want to be able to speak with policymakers, you need to know how to speak with the general public. If you want to have an audience that is very honest, in that if they don't understand something, they ask you. If they're bored, they walk away. Well, the best audience for that is really children. So if you want to improve your science communication skills, start by teaching children about One Health. And so this book was made to be short, to fit into a purse, a book, like a book bag, or read it on a train. So that's my pitch. It's available on Amazon. Thanks, Jonna, for that.
And I'll just share in addition to that, because I also going to recommend a book, is I just, in wherever you're working and whatever you're working in, to try to read and understand because of the importance of behavior and communication and everything else, really understanding the culture and the history and from a policy perspective, from a community perspective, from an anthropological perspective, to learn about it, right? So when I worked in One Health with Somalis, when I would bring anybody who came on new from our team to work with the Somali Ministries of Ag and Ministry of Health, I had a book of Somali poetry I would give everybody, because it showed like how their culture and nomadic pastoralism, I mean, the environment and the animals are part of their life, and how much they love camels is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life, And so I would share that book. If someone tells me they want to work on California public policy and water, they have to read Cadillac Desert, because that's a must, right? And so you need to kind of understand the history of where things came from and what that culture is, and whether it's a book of poems or it's Cadillac Desert or whatever that might be. You just know where you're working and who you're working with. Go talk to them, but also check out what's out there.
Yeah, and I would just follow up on that, for living in the time we're living in right now and understanding where we came from and why we're having some of the struggles we're having. I'm reading Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. And I think if you're interested in social injustice, and what that means for our policies and everything, I highly suggest that one, as well as How to Be an Anti-Racist by Imran X. Kendi. So all these things are related, and that's the beauty of One Health, is trying to bring that stuff together and consider these issues holistically.
Thank you so much. That's all the time we have for today. I wish we could keep asking you guys questions, but we got to go to lunch. So thank you guys all so much for taking the time out to attend and speak on the panel today. It was so inspiring, I'm sure, I'm sure the attendees agree with me, to hear from you all and hear about your individual journeys and your perspectives. And we just want to thank you so much.